Hey guys, it's me, Koreaboo445 with another banger anime video that you will surely have zero complaints about, right? For today's installment of How Far Would Random Bozo 38 Get in Dragon Ball, I am treading into very dangerous territory, let's be real here. I am going to be talking about a certain franchise which has been gaining a lot of traffic recently due to its anime adaptations. You have seen the title, you have seen the thumbnail, yep, we are going to be covering Sung Jin-Woo for today's video. Man, I can already hear the diehard fans of both franchises, by the way, just breathing really heavily as they ready their keyboards to roast me to hell and back. Just remember guys, I might be a Dragon Ball fan, but I am not a Goku deep throater by any stretch of the word. I will do my best to form an objective opinion here, and whatever that opinion turns out to be, it will be just that, an opinion. So please try to keep it as civil as you can. If you disagree with me, or maybe someone else in the comments, right? Just, you know, tone it down a bit, just be civil, right? So yeah, thank you in advance for that. I hope people actually, you know, listen to this, but you know, whatever, probably not. Let's be real. So let's start with a little bit of context on who Jin-Woo actually is for the people who might not know, right? And normally I'd throw a spoiler warning here, but I kinda can't be asked today, so yeah, consider yourself spoiler warned, I suppose. But Sung Jin-Woo is the main protagonist of a webtoon and anime called Solo Leveling, right? He is the strongest hunter in the world and the second Shadow Monarch, having inherited the position from his predecessor Ashborn. Initially an infamously weak E-rank hunter, Jin-Woo got the chance of a lifetime when he was selected as the player of the system, giving him the unique ability to grow in strength without any real restraints being placed on him. And as a result, by taking advantage of the opportunities offered to him by the system, Jin-Woo eventually rose to power as humanity's single greatest hunter. You know, as a baseline, this story really is your typical zero-to-hero story you see in a lot of shonen anime, and for the people who watch a lot of isekai anime, the concept of a system guiding him will be nothing spectacularly new either, right? But admittedly, Solo Leveling does execute these rather common themes in a pretty enjoyable way. And you know, I don't mind if a franchise uses, I suppose, you know, cliché tropes, if they just execute them properly, right? But that's just the way I view it. In terms of his actual personality, Jin-Woo is a pretty humble and generally kind individual who really cares for his family and friends, with a deep desire to become stronger. As a result of this, he shares a close-knit relationship with both his sister and his mother. The worst thing you can do in his mind is just threaten or hurt his family and friends, right? As displayed when he massacred Groktar and his minions for attempting to kill his sister. It's generally a good idea to not harm his loved ones if you fancy having your head attached to your torso. Let's just put it that way to make it perfectly clear what his stance is on people who hurt his friends and family, right? But an interesting aspect about Jin-Woo is that despite being the strongest hunter in the world, he is not particularly arrogant and is both polite and sociable in person. He is also mostly indifferent to materialistic desires and can be very selfless. You might expect the power he has obtained through the system to get to his head and really change him as a person, but he remains rather level-headed, which is a character trait I can really admire if it's just, you know, applied properly. There is nothing worse in my opinion than a good character doing this horrible power trip and just completely ruining the moment and, you know, the character's own personality in the process as well. I just really dislike that, but maybe that's just me. I know there's a lot of edgy, I suppose, teenagers, right? I'm fucking old by now, who just really like the edgelord, like, I don't know how to describe it, but you probably know what I mean, right? But I've kind of outgrown that, so I can appreciate it if a character is written in a way where he's powerful, like he might be even the best, right? But he just keeps being himself, right? I can really appreciate that in a character, so I'm also very happy that Solo Leveling didn't go the complete edgelord route, right? But you know, moving on. In battle, however, he is definitely ruthless as he tends to, well, slaughter his enemies without a second thought, really. Like, Jin-Woo is the least racist man alive because every enemy is just a dead hunk of meat in his eyes, no matter the color of their skin, the race they have, or even their species for that matter. But let's move over to his actual abilities and feats, as I feel most of you are here for that specific reason anyway, right? So Jin-Woo is actually interesting because his abilities function like an actual video game character for the most part. And I don't mean he is like, say, Kratos or Geralt Geralt or Mega Man or Sonic or something like that. For example, his stamina is actually measured in percentages. At 0 to 69% stamina used, he has no real negative effects. At 70 to 89% stamina used, his speed is halved and he experiences fatigue, etc. But before I start yapping about his actual specific abilities and stuff, let's take a look at his overall measurements first. In terms of offensive power, he is at the very least someone that can be considered planetary, right? Being real, he is probably stronger than that, and he's probably a lot stronger than that. But his feat of destroying the army of the Chaos World and multiple monarchs and rulers proves to me he is at the very least capable of planetary levels of destruction. And this instantly makes placing him anywhere below the Saiyan saga not really realistic, because this is when we first saw small planet busters in Dragon Ball, and you might combat me on that. But if you just follow the manga as the original canon, the very first character that is actually capable of destroying a small planet like the Earth is Vegeta when he arrived on Earth during the Saiyan saga at a power level of 18,000. There is even some official guidebooks that specifically state that in order to destroy a planet like the Earth, a small planet, you have to have a power level of at least 10,000. But I'm not going to debate that in this video, so let's move on to how fast he is. So in terms of how fast he actually is, he is easily faster than Light, as proven by him dodging attacks like the Breath of Destruction, which moves faster than Light itself. He should really be able to compete with a lot of Dragon Ball characters on this front, which is actually pretty nice, since usually speed is the argument people, me included honestly, pull when they don't want a character to win versus Dragon Ball. Because, the logic is if you can't keep up with Dragon Ball, you won't even be able to hit them. So yeah, it's a pretty simple argument, but it's an effective one. But in terms of durability, he is probably also at least planet level, likely higher, right? Since offensive and defensive abilities often go hand in hand. And in terms of stamina, he has been able to fight non-stop for 27 years in the Chaos World, so it's pretty safe to say that he has everyone in Dragon Ball just straight up beaten on that front, because there is not a single Dragon Ball character who's going to be fighting for 27 consecutive years. Let's just not try to even argue that one. It's pretty clear cut, let's be honest. But where he really shines, I suppose, is the fact that he has game-like skills. Think of his inventory, in which he can store unlimited items he obtains, and from there he can even equip items to gain their buffs without actually having to physically equip them. So it's pretty overpowered if you just look at it and take it at face value. But he also has titles he can equip, which you might see in MMO or RPG games, such as, for example, Wolf Slayer, which buffs his stats by 40% when facing beast-type enemies. Or his title called Triumphant Over Adversity, which gives him stat increases based on the amount of HP he has left. The less HP he has, the stronger he gets. And to add on to that, he also has passive skills such as Unyielding Spirit, which reduces any incoming damage by 50% when he is below 30% HP. And combine this with another one of his passive skills, which also just reduces his incoming damage by 20% permanently, and you have a very tanky guy if you just run the numbers, right? And I won't cover every single one of his skills in this video, because some are rather useless, let's be fair there. But he has one skill which really defines him as a character within solo leveling, and that would be his ability to extract a fallen enemy's shadow and create a copy of them completely obedient to Jin-Woo. The chances of success depend on the level of the one being revived compared to the user. You can consider the level as how strong the target is compared to the user in the context of this video. I think that's a pretty safe assessment to make here. But other factors such as the time passed since death and if the user actually killed the enemy also affect the effectiveness of this ability. A bit of a drawback, if you want to really call it a drawback, I don't consider it a drawback, but I've seen some people consider this a drawback, so I'm going to mention it here, is that this skill can only be attempted on an enemy thrice, and if it fails 3 times, the skill can no longer be used on that enemy and the enemy can't become a shadow anymore. But the skill's effectiveness also has certain nuances as to how strong the shadow might turn out to be, because if certain conditions are met, like for example the shadow not wishing to die for example, the shadow might start out stronger. So by the end of the series, Jin-Woo has access to well over 10 million shadow soldiers, many of which are at least city level to continent level in terms of power. So with all of this out into the open, how far do I think Jin-Woo would get in Dragon Ball? Just being completely honest here, the very lowest I would consider placing him is the Android Saga, and that is just everything going extremely horribly bad for Jin-Woo, right? His army of shadows would easily help him take out the entire Frieza force, and he himself should be able to handle Frieza with very little difficulty, or at least I should say I don't envision him having a lot of difficulty beating Frieza. But how far he goes from there is pretty dependent on how lucky he gets with his shadows, if you were to ask me. If he can recruit Frieza, for example, he gets a major buff in his army, and the same with Cell, and the same with Boo, etc. And depending on how strong you think he is, the results will obviously change, you know, that's pretty obvious. You know, earlier I said that Jin-Woo is at least planetary, but likely far stronger, right? You know, within the context of solo leveling, he ends up fighting outer gods which created their own universes themselves and ended up winning against them, so I won't look at you strange if you put him at a universal power level. There are even several instances of dimensions breaking apart due to Jin-Woo's powers, so you can even highball him to stuff like outerversal. But I personally think that the further you go into the whole outerversal this and nth dimension jargon, like, the less substance the entire conversation holds, in my opinion. Because let's be completely honest, most of the people who say like, oh, this character is ninth dimensional, don't even know what the fuck it means. Like, come on now. It's at that point, it just gets to a point where either you just don't want the character to lose due to personal bias, or you just really want to sound smarter than you are. Because, you know, I don't know, it just kind of ruins it for me. I tend to avoid it as much as possible because I just don't think it's really adding any substance to the video. But you know, that's just me. Maybe I'm just a complete idiot, who knows. But I mean, in an ideal situation, Jin-Woo would not even have to really fight in Dragon Ball. He could just sit back and let Dragon Ball do the work for him. Because if you just look at everyone in the cast of Dragon Ball, they've all died, some even multiple times. So Jin-Woo can just add them to his army and just sip a cocktail from the sidelines. Jin-Woo even becomes immune to stuff like reality erasure in the series and eventually just becomes straight up immortal. To be honest, at this point, no matter what outcome I sketch here, the losing fandom is going to disagree heavily, right? We can already assume that's going to happen. Because Jin-Woo versus guys like Goku is an argument that just goes on endlessly as follows. Jin-Woo is immune to that, bro. But Goku out-hacks that immunity, bro. But Jin-Woo would overpower that hacks, bro. And it just goes on and fucking on. And honestly, I feel my mood drop the moment that discussion starts forming, so it would probably be better for me to just avoid the comments of this video. But my personal take is that the later sagas of Dragon Ball Super, starting with the Future Saga probably, right, could overpower Jin-Woo. Infinite Zamasu from the manga, which is arguably even more broken, the Omni King, all of these guys with the God Key, and just all of these guys are also like outerversal or some bullshit like that, right? So starting from that point, I could just see Jin-Woo starting to more consistently lose fights, but again, that's really just my opinion and the way I look at this. I am going to get hate regardless of the outcome anyway, so that's just where I envision Jin-Woo losing battles, you know, more consistently really. But then again, I really can't be mad at people who think Jin-Woo would crush Dragon Ball, because that is not a stupid take to have at all if you just look at the shit he can pull out from between the stinky ass cheeks in solo leveling. He is so broken and overpowered in his own universe that I really can't blame people for thinking he could just destroy every single other universe out there with little to no effort, right? It's really not a stupid take to have. But yeah, that is probably enough of me rambling on about stupid power scaling subjects for this week. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching today's video. As per usual, I truly do appreciate every single viewer that just takes the time out of their busy day to watch my content. It makes me very happy to know that even a handful of people just enjoy the content I produce. That's why I even make content to begin with. So if you would like to see more of my content in the future, please consider clicking the subscribe button, liking the video, turning on all notifications for my channel, maybe watch another video, like, you know the drill, right? So work hard, study well, and eat and sleep plenty, and I will see you all again in the next video. Peace out.